When somebody's trying to get rid of you, sometimes you have to maliciously comply. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, new boss destroys everything for everyone. I worked for this tech company for almost 7 years. It was my first job out of college. Great company, huge growth, great benefits, and most importantly, an incredible boss. The boss was super helpful and responsive, always had the team's back, goes out of his way to not micromanage, didn't care as long as the work got done, borderline forced people to take PTO, we have unlimited and I averaged 30 to 40 days off a year, and believed in giving good workers big raises and promotions. Last 3 years I got 9%, 13%, and a promotion and 7% raises. We worked remote through COVID, and I asked to change my contract to fully remote so I could leave the high cost of living city where the office was based to go back to my hometown. Boss approved the change, and when HR tried to do a cost of living adjustment to my salary, boss told them no because I'll be doing the same work in my new location. The boss was so good that on our team of 16 people, the lowest tenured was 3.5 years. I'd been offered several other jobs with salary increases throughout the years, but could never bring myself to leave. Myself and one other person on my team had specialized into working on very complex and involved projects. These were significantly different than the team's normal day-to-day work. We'd been doing the complex projects for 4+ years and were the knowledge base for the company in that area. Boss left that area completely to us to manage. As the volume picked up, we added and trained 2 more people to our little sub-team to help out. None of these projects went out to the customers without one of us 4 being involved. Super complex, hundreds of thousands to millions lost if a mistake was made, and since it was the fastest growing part of the business by far, we were super busy. Now around 2 years ago, boss's boss gets promoted from his VP role up to an SVP spot, and hires a new VP. This new VP comes in and tries to change a lot very quickly, tries to make everything a trackable metric. Even where it really doesn't make sense, i.e. tracking the number of projects each person on my team did every month, counted as one even if it was super complex and took 2 weeks, or if it was very simple, with an existing customer and took an hour. Wanted each project to go out faster. Even if they weren't due for a week, we were supposed to get them out in under 3 days. Tried to force my boss to assign work to the team instead of us all picking up from a central queue as we could, etc, etc. Boss pushed back as much as possible, but was getting crapped on constantly by new VP because the useless metrics VP wanted us tracked by did not meet his super unrealistic expectations. Despite my boss's team being the most experienced and efficient in the company and doing significantly more volume and more complex work than any other team. About 9 months ago, boss had enough of just constantly getting crapped on by VP and took a new job and left. Boss had been with the company for 13 years and was one of the first 100 employees. My whole team was devastated. We all instantly started lobbying for the most tenured person on our team to get promoted into that role, as she would have the same philosophy as the boss that just left. VP interviews most tenured and a bunch of external candidates, and goes with someone from his previous company. Now, this lady will be referred to as Bench Boss from here on out for soon-to-be obvious reasons. She came in and completely destroyed the team from top to bottom, changed processes that had been perfected for years, didn't listen or care about what anyone else had to say, started micromanaging to the extreme. Team morale dropped like a rock. It took less than a month for the team's output to crater due to all of her changes. The team from the best in the company to the worst. It took Bench Boss about 2 months to get to my smaller sub-team and try to rework our processes. Bench Boss started micromanaging projects, having no idea what she's doing, and causing all kinds of issues and delays. She started getting on us 4 about our metrics being the worst on the team, despite us working on the super complex projects that took 10 to 100 times longer on average than most of the work the rest of the team did. Bench Boss told us that if we didn't meet the expected metrics, we would be put on performance improvement plans. So we decided to comply and focused all of our efforts on simple projects to meet the metric. X number of projects completed per month, per person, and left the complex ones sitting in the queue. This caused chaos as my small sub-team suddenly stopped picking up complex projects and just focused on completing simple projects to get our metrics up. Very quickly, the sales team is freaking out because deals are getting delayed and their huge commission checks from the complex projects are being put in jeopardy. When they came to us to ask when we were going to complete the complex projects, we all gave the same response. Bench Boss has told us we have to focus all our efforts on meeting metric X, so we will only be doing that. Unfortunately, that means we can no longer complete the complex projects. Please contact Bench Boss for help getting them completed. This did not go over well with her or VP, as he started to get complaints as well. They called a meeting and told us we had to go back to doing the complex projects. We refused, as that made it impossible to meet the metrics they created to measure our performance. They refused to drop the metric, but still insisted we work on the complex ones, as we were the only ones with the knowledge. We still refused. This resulted in a lot more complaints from sales until the SVP got involved. The SVP was the one who created the complex sub-team to begin with, and sided with us against the VP and Bench Boss. He said we were not to be measured by the metrics and can go back to managing the complex stuff without fear of being put on a performance improvement plan. So we did. At this point, the other 3 people on the sub-team had seen the writing on the wall and were all actively applying and trying to leave ASAP. They were all office-based in the high cost of living area still. Bench Boss changed the team from come in 1 to 2 days a week as needed to mandatory 3 days in the office, the most the company policy would let her, so they got a lot more of her BS than I did remote. I had not been applying because I was distracted. My old boss had approved 2 weeks of vacation for my wedding and honeymoon before he left. This happened to occur about 3 months after Bench Boss started, and about a month after the whole PIP blow-up. Bench Boss was ticked at how we showed her up in front of the SVP and was doing everything she could to make our life miserable. In that month, the other super experienced guy and my best friend on the sub-team got a new job and left. No notice. And one of the other guys on the sub-team has put in his notice and only had a week left. We were already slammed and still behind from the PIP fiasco, so losing half the sub-team just made that worse. Plus, with morale so low, we didn't bother to put in any extra effort anymore. In fact, the whole team was significantly behind, as 6 of the 16 people had left or were on their notice periods at that point. So Bench Boss decided that she was canceling my already approved wedding leave because of how far the team was behind. She told me over Zoom. I told her there was no chance I'm missing my wedding and honeymoon for work, and I'm taking the full leave, and it's up to her if she wants to lose another person from the sub-team for 2 weeks or permanently. She BS'd, yelled, and threatened until I just left the Zoom call. She followed up with an email officially notifying me my leave was canceled, and if I didn't show up, it would be considered job abandonment. I called her bluff and replied, CCing VP and SVP and some other sales VPs who I worked with regularly, explaining the situation. It's my wedding and honeymoon, and that I appreciated the opportunity but was quitting immediately with no notice due to the disrespect from Bench Boss. I got Slack messages from SVP and several of the sales VPs almost immediately asking me not to quit. The email chain itself blew up with complaints about how my team was mismanaged by Bench Boss, and how now more complex deals were going to get lost because I wouldn't be there at all to work on them, etc. SVP eventually shut it down, but it was a fun read. I didn't reply to the Slack messages or do any work the rest of that day. Just turned everything off and went to a bar and had a good time. I woke up the next day late in the morning and very hungover to a few voicemails on my phone from SVP asking me to call him. I called back in the early afternoon and talked to the SVP. He was very understanding, asked me to come back, listened to all my complaints, and eventually made an offer. Basically, if I came back and worked the rest of the week and tried to train a few team members to work on complex stuff to cover while I was gone, he would give me a $3,000 wedding bonus. I would get my full PTO, and when I got back, Bench Boss would leave me alone and let me manage the complex stuff and pick 2 more people to permanently train back onto the sub-team to backfill what we had lost. I accepted. Weddings are freaking expensive, so I tried to train people to cover for me, impossible task, then leave on my PTO. I had a great wedding and honeymoon. VP called me a few times when the 4th guy from my sub-team quit with no notice about 1.5 weeks in, but I ignored him and didn't respond. I come back refreshed and ready for the crap show I know is waiting. It was chaos. All the salespeople were slacking and emailing me about all the complex things they needed done 2 weeks ago. The people I quickly trained before leaving hadn't been able to do almost anything. There was a huge backlog for the entire team, as half of the original 16-person team was gone at this point. I turned off my Slack and emailed the sales VPs directly, asking them to give me a prioritized list of all the complex deals they needed done. Got the list and started working through it in my normal working hours. Nothing more. Bench boss never tried to talk to me or interfere. VP did a few times. At one point, he tried to make me work weekends to catch up. I refused. This went on for about a month or so. Bench boss never mentioned me training people to replace my sub-team, and I never brought it up. They did, however, have the larger team try some of the smaller complex projects to help get them out. They also hired some new people for the larger team. The normal 4 to 6 month training process my old boss developed was ignored, and the new hires were just thrown in the deep end, which resulted in new hires making mistakes that cost the company a lot of money. This brought us to annual bonus and raise time. I had started frantically job hunting as soon as I got back from the honeymoon. I got some interviews, was in the same later stages, but no offers yet. I had a Zoom meeting invite from Bench Boss to go over my bonus and raise. She decided it would be a great idea to give me 80% of my expected bonus, lowest possible, and a 0% raise. Justified it with a bunch of BS, not a team player, metrics bad, blaming me for mistakes made by new hires, etc., etc. I didn't really argue or care at that point. At that point, I really quiet quit. Cut my daily output to below half. Just did the bare minimum and waited for the bonus to come in with my next paycheck 2 weeks later. At this point, the sales team is getting ticked because the complex stuff basically isn't getting done. I had almost caught up on the important ones before the raise/bonus, but with me barely working, everything was falling behind again. Bench boss smelled weakness and showed up on one of those progress calls I had with sales. The project was running about 1.5 weeks behind at that point. She started chewing me out on the call in front of everyone, saying I was lazy and not doing my job, etc. I let her rant and then just said, "If you give me the lowest bonus possible and a 0% raise, you get 0% effort in return. You can complete this project since I'm so terrible at my job," and left the call. She tried a few more times on email chains, etc. to call me out for not working, and I just replied with the same thing. I refused to join her Zoom calls or respond to her on Slack, and just responded with the 0% effort blurb on every email. This infuriated her. I still hadn't gotten another job, but was really confident I was about to get one soon. So when VP set up a Zoom call with me, I joined. He tried to play nice and ask what the problems were and pretended to be on my side. I told him for a 0% raise, I'm giving 0% effort, and he pretended like he had no idea how I ended up with that raise or bonus. He has to approve the bonus and raise amounts. I called him out on his BS and told him he gets what he pays for. He then threatened to fire me if I didn't go back to my old level of output, and said the people I'd been training in complex projects could take over for me soon, so I wasn't as necessary as I thought. I laughed and asked him what he was talking about. I hadn't been training anyone. He went quiet and muted. He was clearly messaging Bench Boss asking about the training because he unmuted a few minutes later and changed his entire attitude. Agreed, it was awful of Bench Boss to do that to my bonus and raise, and asked what he could do to make it right. I didn't care at that point and knew he needed me more than I needed him, so I told him I need a 25% raise and 150% of the bonus on that new salary or I was quitting immediately. He tried to say that was ridiculous and could never happen, etc., so I bluffed and told him I already had another job offer and was leaving anyway. He asked me to wait and he'd bring SVP onto the call. SVP tried to talk my demand down. At that point, I realized it wasn't worth it. I refused the significantly lower counteroffer, thanked the SVP for everything he did for me, and said I was quitting immediately. VP tried to say I'll never get a good reference if I don't at least work a notice period. I just told him my ex-boss would give me a glowing recommendation of my time here, so I didn't care, and logged off. SVP tried to get me to come back a few times over the next week or so, but I refused. A few weeks later, I got a job offer and accepted. I've been working at the new company for a while now, and it's pretty crappy. Better than the old company, but nowhere close to what I had before with my old boss. Although old boss reached out and said he might have a position opening up in his new company in a month or two that I should apply for. So I'm looking forward to that. I've heard from people who are still in my old team that it's a complete disaster at my old job. They are losing millions from not having the knowledge base to correctly complete the complex projects. They reached out to the other experienced guy from the sub-team and offered him a huge raise to come back after I quit. He refused. Everyone left on my old team is trying to leave ASAP, and even the simple stuff is weeks overdue. Apparently bench boss is getting thrown under the bus by VP and will be fired soon. I don't know if the SVP was absolutely swamped or is working in a different facility or state or something, because how does he see the bench boss and VP actively burning things to the ground, ruining morale? Things are declining very fast because of their direct actions, and is just so hands-off until they literally need to stomp out the fire. And the fire's already been well burning for a while by the time they try to stomp it out. It's like the whole building burnt down and they're trying to save the one support beam that's holding the thing up. Our next story is, you really want me to log time by the ticket? I'm sure all of you reading this have to log their work time in one way or another, and I'm sure most of you don't agree with the granularity of said logging. So I work in IT. Many years ago, I was involved in a big project creating a new platform while maintaining the old one. So during the week, I would spend some time on support tickets. My role was more high level. I would never be the one to actually work on a ticket. At one point in time, there was a new support coordinator assigned to the client account. The number of tickets was rising and the team couldn't keep up, threatening the new platform. The coordinator needed metrics on the team's performance, so he generated reports from the ticketing and the time logging systems, combined them, and started to look into improvements, until he came across my logs. The metrics told him I spend about 2 hours a week and edit a varying amount of tickets. This looks weird, and he couldn't bill the client on tickets I worked on, so he asked me what was going on. I explained that I would look over the list of open tickets, bulk update where needed, and log my time with a remark like classified tickets. Then I would move on to my other duties. He didn't like that and told me to enter a time log for each separate ticket I work on. I asked him what the minimum time was that he wanted me to log, which turned out to be 15 minutes. Fast forward a few weeks of me spending an hour a day logging hours, and logging that task too, and creating virtual overtime of about an hour a day. Then the coordinator comes up to me with a request to go through and update the full backlog. I'm fine with that and tell him I'm logging that as a generic task and not per ticket. He tells me no, it must be logged per ticket. So finally, the malicious compliance. I spend about 2 hours to go over the backlog and make sure everything is in order. Then I spend the rest of the day entering everything into the time logging system. Fun fact, I was the first to reach the system's limits, but found a workaround to log everything. That day, as I logged in the time tracking software, I worked for more than 16 hours. The rest of the week I took it easy, came in late, went home early. I was done for the week and every hour I worked extra would be unpaid, right? When it came time for the invoicing, the coordinator could not justify the huge amount of hours I logged on the account. My rate was twice that of a tech support, and finally he allowed me to stop logging by the ticket. My productivity went up again, as did my mood. I did flag the potential problems and drop in productivity to the CTO and CEO, who I reported to directly, but they said to comply anyway. We did laugh about it afterwards, and learned a lesson in how to not waste time. Thank you for reading my story. Anytime I hear a story come along of this logging thing, it just is so monotonous. Really, the last thing you want to do is show up to work and do X amount of things, and then also have to take time to make sure you write down all of those X amount of things that you did and how long it took you to do them. Like, I get it, if something is really not working, logging time seems like an obvious thing, but especially to try to enforce it in general, and especially the manglers who hound people who are legitimately doing a decent job to track everything super specifically, I'm not surprised why it would burn out or really frustrate your employee. Our next story is, was denied 2 days of paid PTO, so I took off a whole month. When I worked corrections, I requested for 2 weeks off. I had been there for years and accrued plenty of paid leave. It was given to me as I'd done so months in advance for a personal event. The 2 weeks went by way too quick. I had specifically lined up my 2-week break to lead into my 2 days off at the beginning of the break and at the end so I could maximize my time off. However, during my normal off days, a family emergency came up that was quite serious, so I asked for another 2 days off to handle my situation. I was told by my direct supervisor that there was no way she was approving that, because we're only allowed to use 84 hours of leave in one continuous block. Given our rotating written schedules in 12-hour shifts, this equaled 2 weeks, and she ordered me to come in the next day, or I would receive a write-up. I didn't argue because I knew she was correct, so I showed up that night and reported for my shift, and much to my surprise, my captain had called out sick, so a relief captain came in to fill her shift. I asked him to give me the next day off after my shift was over. He and I had a rapport given the number of years we'd worked with each other previously, and so we looked at the schedule and my leave. He said, "You know you've got plenty of leave, right?" I said, "Yes, I know. I just need some of it to handle my business tomorrow." He said, "No, I mean, you've got plenty of leave to take, and the roster is filled the next 2 weeks." I said, "Yeah, I just got off a 2-week vacation." I stopped because he winked at me, and it finally clicked. We can only take up to 2 weeks off consecutively. Nothing says we can't take off 2 weeks, come in for, say, an hour, and then go home and take off another 2 weeks. So I did, and he signed a paperwork stating, "It's not my shift. Freak that bench." I handled my emergency literally the next day. It turned out to be not as serious as we thought, and then enjoyed another paid 2 weeks off from work. It was great. To add to the bliss, I reported back from work to find out that this captain was fired and replaced for some kind of negligence or something. It was a great month. Edit, the captain I worked for was fired. The captain everyone liked who gave me the PTO stayed for a couple more years before retiring. You gotta love that it's even possible that using your own vacation time is capable of being considered malicious compliance. Not even ignoring the fact that OP said, "Listen, I literally have a family emergency, I need 2 days." And the captain coldly replies, "Screw you, you can't do that, we're not going to let you. Tough luck." Our next story is denied leave on a day with no work, so I'll take them on days I have work. I'm a teacher at a small, new school. We currently have 2 year levels, so our teaching schedules are incredibly light. This means every teacher has at least 1 day where they have no classes, and it's common to take leave on that day. Mine is Friday. I realize we'll move to a full schedule next month, and figured I might as well use some excess leave, and applied to take Fridays for the rest of the month off. Later, I was told my leave was denied because it's not nice that you get to have multiple long weekends when your colleagues don't. And I responded with, "So you're saying just because my lesson-free day is on a Friday, I don't get to take leave, even though the science teachers can take every Tuesday off, language teachers take every Thursday, and so on?" He kind of waffled around that it doesn't look good, and that I still have to consider a homeroom lesson I have Fridays, which is a student-led activity time. I'm actually not supposed to do anything or intervene, just be present while students handle everything that someone else will have to cover. I've always asked and gotten my own covers before applying for leave, so HR has never even had to do anything. Anyway, I told them straight up that I don't mind if they want to deny my leave, but remember that I'm there because I want to be, not because I need to be. I told them okay, but just so you know, it was a courtesy on my end to use my leave on days with the least impact. So you're essentially telling me that you'd rather me take leave on days I miss actual classes, which I have no qualms doing. He kind of mumbled something, and then I thanked him and left. So that Friday, I came in, and then the following Monday I called in sick and missed my class. I have about 20 leave days to use over the next around 7 months, not counting school holidays, that make up the final year of my contract here, and I plan to use all of them. I've also told them on a separate occasion that there's literally no downside to me whether or not they approve or deny my leave requests, because 80% of the leave I've taken the past 2 years has been unpaid, because I don't care about the money. Once, they denied a 3-day unpaid leave request, and I told a colleague, "I can just not show up. What are they gonna do? Not pay me?" That's literally what I asked for in the first place, so either way I get what I want. They need me more than I need them, as the sole teacher of the most popular elective subject in the school. It's somewhat niche, so it's not easy to just find a replacement. Not to mention I have both qualifications and experience in my subject's industry, so any replacement they do find is probably going to be not as good. Really, what was their goal? Try to make OP afraid of taking leave? Try to make OP feel bad for taking leave on a convenient day and hoping that they wouldn't have the confidence to take leave on days that do actually matter? Like, was this an attempt to play on OP's fears? Either way, I'm more than happy to have Mondays off if you don't want me to have Fridays. It still kind of defeats the whole stupid argument they were having though. Our next story is, hand over all my tasks so you can get rid of me? Okay. A few years back, I was the IT contracts and supplier manager at a large company. Been there 25 plus years and had a lot of corporate knowledge, having worked in multiple roles over that time. Also was very well paid due to length of tenure and experience at the company. A new jerk boss gets hired and proceeds to get rid of people he doesn't like and hires his buddies into various roles. The workplace culture took a nosedive pretty quickly. I knew my time was limited as I wasn't in his inner circle. Seeing the writing on the wall, I started looking for and applying for other roles. The jerk boss gets me in their sights and decides to get rid of me, looking to move one of his recently hired buddies to my specialized role. He doesn't even understand what I do, needing a lot of technical knowledge combined with contract and legal. He tells me he wants to move on to an upcoming project and to finish off what I'm currently working on and not take on any new work. Through all my contacts across the company, I knew there was no new project or even a significant budget for one, but I'll do what I'm told. I wrap up my work and tell him I'm ready for the project. He says sit tight, it's not far away, and don't start anything else. So I sit at my desk applying for other jobs and waiting. One of the jobs I applied for comes through and get an offer on a Friday morning. That same afternoon, the jerk boss comes around and says, the project isn't happening. And as you have nothing else on your plate, we will have to let you go. Yahtzee! I know there is heaps of work backed up and the crap is going to hit the fan soon when contracts aren't renewed, services canceled, etc. I also know my employment contract and they will have to pay a generous redundancy because the boss told HR my role isn't required anymore. I say, okay, I guess you'll have to pay me a redundancy too? Sure, he says, not knowing what he's agreed to. So I go through the redundancy process and at the same time accept the offer of the new job. Come my last day, I happily accept the $200,000 payout. His face goes pale when he hears of the amount because it comes out of the team's budget, walk out the door and into the new job the day after. Love my new job, less stress, great culture, a great team. Wish I'd left earlier, but then I wouldn't have got the payout if I resigned. 4 weeks later, I hear the crap is hitting the fan, and they advertise for a new person for my old role as no one knows what to do, because apparently my job was easy. He didn't even ask me to document what I did to hand over to anyone else. This is the kind of situation where if they call you up much later asking for you to come back and do anything, or teach them any of the processes that you did do, you offer to do so but for a hefty consultancy fee. Well, I certainly could do that, but you'll have to pay my consultant fee. What can they do? Say no? They need that, right? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.